That could never happen here in Britain. That could never happen to us. Really? Anyone around 50 years old will know that we've had our own taste of financial and social collapse in the relatively near past. Around 40 years ago, Britain entered its own lost decade of economic chaos. Back in the 1970s, inflation ate into cash savings at a rate of 28%. Yes, 28%. It seemed like every time you turned your back, bank savings lost more of their value. Every single day, you became a little poorer. The FTSE 30 entered the worst bear market in history, falling 73% between 1973 and 1974. Even gilts, our so-called safe haven, collapsed as interest rates went sky high. Rising interest rates buckled the financial system. But it went deeper than that. The speed of social breakdown was frightening. The general strike meant dead bodies went unburied as gravediggers joined the picket line. Stinking piles of rubbish rotted on the streets, towering inside Leicester Square. Those lucky enough to have jobs had to swallow huge wage cuts during the infamous 3-day week. Shoppers scoured supermarket shelves by torchlight during blackouts. That's not to mention the violent civil unrest, where thousands of the unemployed and strikers clashed with the police. For millions of people trying to keep their hard-earned money secure, it was a nightmare. As the top rate of income tax peaked at 83% in 1974, foreign investment steered away from Britain as if it were an island colony of lepers. We were the sick man of Europe. Property and banking crises meant that people's lives changed dramatically for the worse. Jobs were lost. Family businesses closed. People had to dig deep into their savings just to make ends meet. The country was brought to its knees. So when we're talking about financial emergencies, don't be under any illusions. It can happen here in Britain, just as it can happen anywhere, given the right conditions. In 1976, humiliated, the UK government had to be rescued by the International Monetary Fund, with Jim Callaghan going cap in hand to beg for a huge bailout. Humbled, he delivered what was meant to be a wake-up call for the British financial and political system. We used to think you could spend your way out of recession and increase employment by boosting government spending. I tell you, that option no longer exists, and so far as it ever did exist, it only worked on each occasion by injecting a bigger dose of inflation into the economy, followed by a higher level of unemployment as the next step. These words are amongst the most important ever uttered in the history of modern British politics. Unfortunately, almost everyone has forgotten them. For a left-wing Prime Minister to admit that too much state spending is dangerous should have marked a big turning point in our history. But of course it didn't, as this chart so aptly illustrates. In the 1970s, the spend-borrow-spend experiment should have ended. It should have been our wake-up call, but we just kept on spending. So long as interest rates kept going down, there was always a way to put off the pain, a reason to borrow more, a justification for not balancing the books. But the day of reckoning is approaching. When? Well, we can't say exactly. It might be a long, slow, drawn-out process that drains your wealth over the next decade. Or this time next year, the financial system could be breaking apart. It's impossible to say. But we think that savers and investors who are not aware of the full risks and who fail to protect themselves will suffer the most. The vast majority of people here in Britain will have no idea what action to take as they watch their wealth and financial security drain away, out of reach, perhaps forever. The important question for you is, when this happens, will you know what to do? When these events unfold, very few people will have any idea how to respond. Most will see the assets they've worked all their life to secure begin to lose value rapidly. It won't matter if you have £5,000 in the bank or £500,000. It won't matter if you own a 5-bedroom house in Esher or a 1-bedroom flat in Croydon. This crisis will lay waste to the wealth of anyone who isn't prepared for it. The most horrible feeling will be the loss of control and the confusion. Desperate to take some sort of action, many people will feel pressured into making investments that could blow up in their faces. The cost of making the wrong move with your money over the next few years could be lasting. What if your money is trapped in one of the banks that collapse? What if your invested wealth is stuck in one of the companies most likely to crash? This is about knowing what you can do with your money if the worst of the crisis unfolds. Our intention is not to be melodramatic. But if events unravel as we expect, thousands of people will lose a lot of what they have, and they won't be able to do a thing about it. By the time most people have pieced it all together, or the true significance of this information makes the headline news in the financial press, it will be too late. And that's why so many people could get caught out and lose so much money. It's essential you prepare for these events. You can't rely on mainstream commentators to help you. Britain's huge accumulation of debt means its fate has already been sealed. We are about to pay for what we've borrowed, and in the worst possible way. If you have any remaining doubts that a day of financial reckoning approaches, watch the next 2 minutes of this film, and we'll prove it to you conclusively. In recorded economic history, every single country with debts as big as ours, every single one, has suffered a devastating economic collapse. There are no exceptions. For example, during the Great Depression, when thousands of ordinary people lost everything, America's total debt hit 252% of GDP. In any circumstances, that's bad. But things can get worse. During the Japanese economic collapse, which triggered more than 2 decades of deflation and a 75% drop in the stock market, Japanese total debt hit 498% of GDP. That's twice as bad as the level of debt seen in America during the Great Depression. If Britain's current debts were at those kind of levels, it would be worrying. But in truth, our debts are now much worse than either of those 2 examples. Shockingly, our debt load is now on a scale comparable with one of the most frightening economic disasters of the 20th century. We're talking about the Weimar Republic. Back then, suffering under the weight of brutal war reparations, civil unrest, and shattered public finances, the Weimar Republic's total debt equaled 913% of its economy. Of course, you know what happened next. The government printed money and hyperinflation took off. In the end, it was cheaper to decorate your home with banknotes than wallpaper. Ultimately, the country descended into a period of economic and social crisis, a catastrophe that ended with the rise of the Nazi Party. And that was with debts worth 913% of the economy. Today, Britain's total debt equals 900% of the economy. When you add up our financial sector debt, government debt, personal debt and corporate debts, our debt load rivals the Weimar Republic in scale. To put it mildly, this worries us a great deal. It should worry you too, because this simple fact alone proves just how inevitable Britain's coming crisis is.